Hey everybody! Today we're going to be talking about how to pick the best rendering intent for when you're printing your photographs. So let's get started. One of the things that I enjoy about photography is making prints. You know, those old school analog things that you can pick up and hold in your hand and enjoy without a computer screen. I make my prints on a wide format Canon printer and I really enjoy using it. But before you hit that print button in Photoshop or Lightroom, you get asked a very important question by the printer driver, and that's what rendering intent you want to use. I'll show you what I mean about being asked that in the printer driver. So this is an image of an iris that I made some time back, and I'd like to print it. So I go to File, Print, and this opens the Canon Pro 2000 printer dialog box. You can see here that it lists my Canon Pro 2000 printer. Here we have the printer profile, and that is how the driver will end up knowing what colors my printer can actually make, and we'll talk about that a little later. But here is what we're focusing on for this video, which is rendering intent. And you can see if you go to this drop-down menu, there are actually 4 rendering intents. But in terms of printing photographs, we really only have to worry about 2. And those are relative colorimetric and perceptual. And we do have to make a choice, and the choice can affect the way the print looks, so we want to make the right one. After we do make the choice, then we can go ahead and print by clicking on the print button. To start understanding the difference between rendering intents for printing, let's first look at this chart, which represents all the colors we can see. Now the human eye can see somewhere between 7 to 10 million colors, so it probably won't be surprising to learn that even modern inkjet printers can't reproduce all these many millions of colors. Obviously, every printer brand is going to have a different set of colors they can reproduce based on the chemistry of their inks. However, what is a constant among all printer brands is that they can't produce anywhere near the number of colors that we can see. Photoshop or Lightroom or any other software you use knows what colors your printer can actually make, having gleaned that information from your printer's color profile. But that's a subject for another video. So let's add to the chart an indication that there are only so many colors a printer can generate. For the sake of argument, let's go with the assumption that you have a printer that can reproduce all the colors contained within this black triangle. Those colors inside the triangle are called your printer's in-gamut colors, and any of the colors that lie outside the triangle are called out-of-gamut for your printer. These out-of-gamut colors are the ones that your printer can't make. So, if there are any out-of-gamut colors in your photo after you've processed it, then what's your printer to do with them? That's what rendering intent is all about. The rendering intent is really a set of instructions that tells your printer what to do with colors that it's simply unable to reproduce. While there are 4 rendering intents available to choose from, there are really only 2 that are useful for printing photographs. These are perceptual and relative colorimetric. So let's see if we can understand the difference between them. Let's pick a color that's out of gamut for our printer. Let's say this green one that my printer can't reproduce, and see what the 2 different rendering intents do with it. Let's start with relative colorimetric. The relative colorimetric rendering intent preserves only in-gamut color relationships, by which I mean it leaves all colors that are in gamut unchanged and prints any out-of-gamut colors as the closest in-gamut color that it possibly can. But what does all that mumbo-jumbo really mean? Let's look at that out-of-gamut color green that we saw on the chart before. Using the relative colorimetric rendering intent, the printer is simply instructed to take that very saturated green and print it as saturated as it's able to, and not change any of the in-gamut colors within the triangle. By leaving the colors in the triangle completely unchanged, they continue to maintain their color relationships and contrasts with each other. But that out-of-gamut green that was printed as saturated as a printer could make it is now the exact same color as the most saturated in-gamut green of the same hue that had been in the photo before. So we lose the color contrast between them while everything else stays the same. So how is the perceptual rendering intent different? The perceptual rendering intent preserves the color relationships of all colors, both in and out of gamut, by changing all of them in a proportional way so that they'll fit into the triangles of colors that the printer is able to make. Let's see how it does that by going back to the chart with the out-of-gamut green. Just like the relative colorimetric rendering intent did, the printer simply takes that very saturated green and prints it as saturated as it's able to. But instead of leaving it at that, thereby having that color look exactly like the most saturated green that was already in the photo, the perceptual rendering intent takes that pre-existing saturated green that was in the photo and makes it slightly less saturated. But of course, that move makes that color the same as another one already in the photo. So it takes that one and moves it down a bit, and so on and so on and so on, so that all the green colors of the same hue now fit into the printer's color gamut. Therefore, all those greens maintain their contrast and relationship to each other. This makes for very smooth color transitions, but, as a downside, can lead to some desaturation of the photo. So now let's look at a real-life image and see how all of this really works. So here we have a photo that I took at Lindy Point Overlook in Blackwater Falls State Park. And I'd like to print this. One of the papers I really like using is Ilford Gold Fiber Silk, so I'd like to print it on that paper. But I know I'm going to be asked whether to choose perceptual or relative colorimetric rendering intents. So I think the best way to make that decision, or to get you a good way towards making that decision, is Photoshop soft proofing. And within soft proofing, we can get a sense of what the image will look like with both rendering intents. But before we do that, I made two copies of this image, exactly the same, and super saturated them well beyond what I would ever think of as a finished image. But I super saturated them because I thought that it would exaggerate the difference between perceptual and relative, and I'd just like to show you that so that when we look at the real image, this one, we can get a sense of where and what to look for. So in this image, the way to go to Photoshop soft proofing is we're going to go View, Proof Setup, Custom, and I have it set up to simulate the appearance using the profile for Ilford Gold Fiber Silk that I've made. And I have it set at a relative colorimetric rendering intent. So we're going to click OK. Then I'm going to go to the next copy of the image and go to View, Proof Setup, Custom, same device to simulate, same Ilford Gold Fiber Silk paper profile, but this time set to perceptual. And we're going to click OK. And now let's look at the difference between them. There's a definite difference, most marked in this region here. And you'll see in these trees, this image is both lighter and less contrasty than this one, where a lot of the region gets darker and more contrasty. So I'm going to flip back and forth a couple of times between them just so you can see what the difference is in the rendering intents. This is relative, perceptual, relative, and perceptual. Okay, so we can see there are differences that soft proofing shows us. Let's get rid of these hyper saturated images and look at our real image. So we're going to go down once again and set it up for soft proofing. Here I've got a find the Ilford Gold Fiber Silk paper profile, which is here. And this is set at relative colorimetric. And again, we're looking mainly in this region, even in this unsaturated or less hypersaturated copy. So that's relative. And we go to perceptual, and once again, we see this area gets darker. So there's definitely a difference between the two rendering intents in soft proofing. Again, relative, perceptual, relative, and perceptual. Now again, I'm not saying that soft proofing is the perfect answer, but it clearly gives you an idea of where the changes may be between the two prints and where to look. So let's make some prints. Okay, well, let's go fire up the printer and see what we get. So let's first make our print using the relative colorimetric rendering intent. We'll go ahead and print that out. And here comes our photo with the relative colorimetric rendering intent. As soon as that's done, I'm going to go ahead and put an R on the top of the page so we know which one it is. And now let's go ahead and switch the rendering intent to perceptual. And now we'll go ahead and print a version with the perceptual rendering intent. Let's go click print. And here comes the print with the perceptual rendering intent. And as soon as that's out, I'll go ahead and write a P on the top of that one so we know which one that is. So here are the two prints on my desk. The one on the left being the print made using the relative colorimetric rendering intent, and the one on the right using the perceptual rendering intent. But how do we compare them? To try to really look at prints carefully, I view them in my GTI color-corrected viewing box, and that really gives you a very standardized way of looking at them. So we've got our two prints here in the viewing box, which, as I mentioned, is color controlled to be fair based on the lighting. Now, I'll be the first to admit that this is a little bit difficult to tell on video compared to actually seeing the prints in real life. But visually, when the print is in front of you, just like on the soft proofing, although not exactly to the same degree, the area here is darker and contrastier than that same area on this side, similar to what we saw in the soft proofing in terms of relative comparison. There are some areas that are a bit different that I can see visually as well that I don't think come through very well on the video. And now soft proofing isn't perfect, certainly, but it gives you an idea of how the image is going to translate to paper based on rendering intent. And that lets you make a very wise choice just looking at the soft proofing as to what the optimal rendering intent will be for your particular image. Well, I do hope you found this video useful. And if you have any questions or comments, or even any suggestions about what other kind of topics you'd like to see covered in these videos, please do leave them in the comments section below. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, I'd really appreciate your support by just clicking on the subscribe button and turning on that notification bell. I'm Howard. I appreciate your visiting the channel, and we'll see you next time.